Hey, welcome to the 167. This episode has a zero cap, but lots of zings as we stay in the zone. Welcome to the 167. Hey, welcome back to the 167. I'm here with Pastor Rick George.
Yes, you are.
And Pastor Jake Reeves.
Zip, zip, zamzooey.
And Pastor Lucas. I feel like I need an R in my name.
Sorry.
Zippity doo-dah. All right. So,
Hey, let's do every comment, every response to a question has to include a word with the letter Z in it.
Oh.
So Zowie,
zippity doo-dah, whatever. Or not. We don't have to do that. In fact, let's not do that.
All right.
That was a bad idea.
I was like trying to think of a Z word to respond to that.
I was like, rendezvous. That's a silent Z.
Ooh.
The Z is silent.
I'll just use that for, that response had a couple of silent Z's in it.
Yeah.
Well, if you're zealous about that idea, we can proceed. So the first question we were talking about this weekend, you were in our Move series, and we were talking really about taking those steps out in faith. And this week, you had asked us right out of the gate, you said, who here would choose better over bondage? And I think that the consensus was pretty much that everybody would choose that. But the question that I had when you said that is, I was like, what is so hard about that taking? You know, because there's so many people in bondage, and if you offered them the choice, better or bondage, they'd be like, well, I want better. But a lot of people don't take that. Like, what are the challenges that you see in that? You talked a little bit about that at the beginning of your message, the challenges of people actually getting better and taking that.
I think part of it is just the understanding of what that means and what they think that means. So if I choose better, I'm going to have to give up some things, and the things that I might have to give up are things that I'm not sure I want to give up. And so in that process of choosing better, they do a lot of zigzagging.
Yes.
Back and forth. Just trying to, I want better. I'm going to go there, but then they take a hard turn because it's, I don't want to give up that. And then they come back, and it's this struggle of what I want versus what I'm willing to give up.
Mm-hmm.
Or the perception of what I might have to give up even.
So you think it's actually taking the bondage off in order to get the better. You think is the hardest part.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jake? What do you think is some of the obstacles that stand in our way when we are zigzagging through this?
Well, I seriously think. Oh wait, no, that
We're
doesn't work. Just gonna. I don't know. I think the old, and this isn't a biblical saying, but it still applies in the sense of a lot of times you'll take the enemy that you know as opposed to the you'll take the
devil you know.
Yeah, the devil you know versus, and obviously that's not specifically speaking in spiritual terms here, but saying that you'll take what's comfortable, even though you're miserable, even though you know the toll it's taking on your body, your family, whatever, but you know that if you're an avid smoker, at some point that's going to catch up with you, but right now it comforts you, and you're like, well, okay, I'll live with that because it's comforting me. Because the period of trying to break that is probably going to be, like Pastor Rick said, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be, and you're scared, even though you know that on the other side is going to be better.
Right.
But you're just comfortable.
Yeah. So you have the story, this account of Joshua being with Moses and knowing what the better was. Like he heard God say, this is what I'm going to give you. It's my promise. Going and seeing with his own eyes, this is better. Like this is better than what we've had. It's better than what we currently have. it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort, but it's better. And I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to get better. But the vast majority of the people said, yeah, it's better. We know it's better. It looks better, feels better. It's just too hard.
Yeah.
It's just too hard.
Well, to use your analogy of the smoking, it's hard to put down the Zippo.
Yeah, thank
There
you.
you go.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. But I mean, I agree.
You know
I
what the
think
difference between an elephant and a
No.
Zippo is?
one's a lighter and one's a. Oh, I've heard this. What is-
One's heavy, one's a little lighter.
Oh, that's what it is.
Anyway, boom, bonk.
Oh.
Ba-doom-ba. So coming out of the zoo, not talking
Yep.
about elephants. When you talked about, you said that what moves us, if we're not careful and we don't move, we will move from worshipers to wanderers. So like when you think about that in a modern context, where do you see the church shifting? Like where do you think the trip ups are for moving us from worship to wanderers?
I think the trip up ultimately is in our desire to explore alternate things that we think are out there that we're not getting the benefit of through our relationship with Christ, that there's something else out there that makes us curious. So we're going to explore that. And in that process, we begin to not only wonder what's out there, we begin to wander after it. And I don't think anyone gets lost on purpose. I don't think anyone gets so far away from God on purpose. Or I should say, very few people do. It's
You could almost say that 0 people do.
zero. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely want to stay in the zone of worshiping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was a bad idea. And
This
so
is the greatest podcast.
This is
ever.
definitely the zenith of this podcast.
Sorry, back to you're
Yes.
saying that we don't just, I agree with that because, like I don't think like when you talk to people about how they first discover things like pornography, it's not because they sit there and they open their homepage and it's pornography. They start to like, hey, I'm going to look at this. Oh, I'm going to click this. Oh, I'm going to click this, and 5 clicks you're in. You're
yeah.
there.
So we start off as worshipers and we're like all in. We love Jesus. And then there's that thing over here that captures our attention a little bit. So we wander off a little and then we're back, then we wander off. And again, I think that was part of the Israelites. They knew the promised land, they knew the promise, but along the way, there were things that kind of came about and they began to question God's goodness. They began to question the plan. They began to assess their own abilities and what they thought they could do. And there might be something else that, back there, if we just were back in Egypt, at least, and it's all these things of wondering, what would it have been like if we would have stayed there? And it's that wonder that causes us to wander that then takes us away from being worshipers.
Yeah.
And I feel like the tough thing too is being a worshiper, it requires intentionality. For them, it required, well, I guess technically the tabernacle was still getting set up, but eventually it would require re-engaging with sacrifices, re-engaging with their quote unquote rituals as far as worshiping God. And for us, it means that it takes intentionality of showing up to church, choosing to serve. What we've talked about 1,000 times on this podcast. What are you ingesting? Like, it takes intentionality. And the second you let that intentionality go, then the things of wandering start to like catch your eye and you're like, boop,
Yeah.
boop, boop, boop.
Well,
Yeah.
and I just want to zoom in on one
Yes.
particular aspect of that, which is I think that a lot of the times you end up doing that because of something that is good, but not necessarily better, like we talked about in our last series, where, it's like I'm focused in, like I watch parents that do this all the time where it's like, okay, and it's a temptation even for our family. So my girls play soccer. And it's like, okay, that's great. You play soccer. And it's like, okay, well, we have just like, there's one game this season that's, during church and it's not a big deal. I'm like, oh, that's fine. Because I mean, after all, don't I want my kids to go out and get fresh air? Don't I want them to be active? And isn't it good for their body to have exercise and to do all those things? And it's like, yes, it is. And shouldn't they have learned sportsmanship and teammates? And yes, absolutely. And it's like, so we don't have to go to church. And it starts off with like, okay, that happens once a season. And then now all of a sudden I'm on a traveling team and I never show up to church. And it's like, now I've let something that was a good thing, like it, but it gets in the way of what's better for them, which is, of course, is their, their relationship with Jesus, being not just engaged with friends and peers as teammates on a soccer team, but friends and peers that have similar spiritual values.
Yeah. And so what it, what it creates is this responsibility that every person, so using your analogy, and I would never say to someone, like your child should not be on a competitive travel team.
Yeah.
Like that's a parental decision, a family decision. But what it does is it puts you in a position to then have to be more responsible for making choices that might be unpopular, that could create some tension. So you're going to have to choose, like, are we going to be gone at every tournament and miss every Sunday? Or are we going to set some boundaries and say, here's the parameter? Or are we just going to say, we won't play on Sunday? It just creates a lot of barriers and or responsibilities that you're now responsible for. So, that's life. Like, life is all about choices. And do I want to become this or that? Do I want to go here? Do I want to go there? Do I want to walk into this blessing and this promise of God, or do I want to kind of wander around it? So again, it's not, going back to last week, it's not just a judgment of you can't do this. It's a reflection of values. What do we value most? And do our values line up with God's values? And then making those decisions.
Right.
So, and when, and I'll just throw this in and we can move on. Oftentimes when our values do not align with God's values, that's when we began to wander. And you wander trying to figure out, how can I reconcile this and make it all work? And it rarely all works.
Yeah.
But something suffers. And in that process, you're wandering.
Yeah. You want to interconnect just like the teeth of a zipper.
Sure.
I refuse.
You're welcome. No. Another thing that you said this weekend that I really wanted to highlight, I thought it was really good. You said, I can live with the pain of falling short, but I don't want to experience the shame of stopping short. So tell me a little bit about the difference, and then I'm going to ask you another follow-up question with that. But tell me the difference between, what do you mean by falling short or stopping short?
Yeah. So again, going back to my experience that I shared, so there were times in this journey where I just sat and thought, like, what have I done? Like, this is, like, I just need to cut my losses, right? Just go to the elders and say, hey, I think we should just bail on this whole thing. Like, it was a bad idea, right? It was like, let's stop. 'Cause I was just feeling a little down, discouraged, frustrated, whatever. And so, and I can't pinpoint the day or when it was, but in reading or listening to something, this phrase was uttered, that, and it was in reference to falling short or stopping short. And there's a big difference. Falling short means I was moving, I was acting in obedience, I was being faithful, I was doing everything I could, and at the end, it might have come up a little short. Right? It's like, at the end of the football season, you have the Super Bowl, two teams play, one team wins, 31-28, and it was a field goal difference, and they both left everything The losing team, it's like, man, we gave everything we had. Like, it was so close. We just fell a little short. Right? That's a whole different story than the team that says, we were behind by 15 points, 14 points at halftime, and we
Quit.
mailed it in after that. We quit. Like, we just said, you know what, guys, it's just not our season. It's not our day. So, let's just try to get through the end of the game and go home. That's a whole different story.
I feel like it's the difference between the previous years of KU football and this year, where typically it was just like, all right, guys, this is going to be like every other year. We're going to go out there and get absolutely destroyed.
Yeah.
And at least this year, they're hanging in with teams.
And
they're still
fight.
losing.
And they fight. They started off strong. They've lost a few games, but they get behind and they fight and fight and fight. And we left it all out there. We gave it all. And we fell a little short.
Sure.
Well,
we're not perfect. Sometimes we're going to fall a little short.
Yeah.
And those are the best games where you have, so it's just return for return, and then like you said, it's just whoever possesses the ball in the end and kicks a field goal.
Yeah,
that happens to be it.
So, as a man, as a pastor, as a leader, that spoke to me that my job is to, and I said this in the message, is to step. My job is to be faithful. My job is to be obedient. It might fall a little bit short, but I don't want to be the one that says, I'm just going to quit. I'm giving up. Not for me.
What I thought was so powerful about this is I think that is almost 90% of the reasons that people don't do something is because they fear falling short. They fear the failure of it. And so how can we as Christ followers overcome that to get to that place where we can say, listen, I left it all out on the field and I tried it, because I think that's what happens when you're, at a restaurant and you're like, I should pray for my waitress. It's like, it's not that you don't do it because you go to speak and all of a sudden you're like, man, and you can't speak or you have a sore throat. It's, you don't do it because you're afraid of what the response could be. And so you don't do it. How can we as Christ followers, overcome that? Like what needs to change in our mentality?
Yeah. So for me, go back again, 10 plus years, maybe even longer, 15 years, going back. I read a book from John Maxwell, surprisingly. So on this leadership journey, John Maxwell has been a loud voice, a mentor from a distance for me through writings and watching things. But I read a book that he wrote called Failing Forward, and it was basically the ability to learn from failures, to get back up, and to be better, like to take the next step, to be better. Failure is a necessary part of success. Like if you never fail, you're probably never going to succeed. It's putting yourself in positions where that's that step of faith. I don't know exactly how this is going to work out, but I know that it will. And it might not, this very thing may not be the thing that is the ultimate success, but it's going to get me to a place closer to success. And it's in that book, John Maxwell says, failure is not final. Failing to get up and move forward is final. So failing isn't final. It's just, hey, I gave it everything, a little short. I learned, I grew, I matured. Now let's do it again.
See, this is clearly a Holy Spirit thing because I wanted to be like, I'd like to quote John Max. He has such like that like raspy voice if you've heard him in the last couple years.
John Maxwell.
And he did a podcast recently with Andy Stanley talking about failure. And one of the things that stuck out to me in that was he was talking about, go ask any successful CEO, any successful it doesn't matter. Ask them like, what are the best lessons you ever learned? Nobody ever says, the best thing I ever learned was that time that I bought Amazon stock really low and now I'm rich. Or what they talk about is, there's that time I didn't fire that person. Or there was that time that, I didn't do this or I did that. And from that point on, I learned like failure is massive when it comes to learning, which I was like, man, he's taking John Maxwell. Don't take the one thing I have.
Yeah. So failure can be a great teacher. if you let it. Like if you realize, like, man, I gave everything I had. I thought I was doing the right thing, and I was. I needed a little more. I just didn't finish. So it's just a commitment that I've made to say I will look at what I can do, and I'll give everything I have, no matter. And I'll talk a little bit about it this coming week. No matter how big, how small it is, like that's not the issue. It's, am I giving everything, and then let God take care of the rest.
Well, I think it's too there's a symbiotic relationship almost, I feel like, that happens with failure, where I feel like in order to overcome that fear of failure, you have to empty yourself of pride a little bit, because that's the thing. It's like, I don't want to look stupid.
Oh yeah.
But it's the same thing where, I think about basketball, where in 8th grade basketball, my coach, he just made us shoot free. Like that was half of our practice. Every practice was shooting free throws. Cause in 8th grade,
Everyone's fouling.
yeah, everyone's fouling you. So if you just make all your free throw shots, we would score 50 points a game just in free throws.
Yeah.
And so he would just make us do that over and over and over and over again. And so it was like this thing where it's like, if you just said, oh, well, I'm practicing free throws. If you missed 5 shots, you'd be like, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm practicing free throws. And so it was if you really let it bother you every time you missed, you'd be like, I'm such a failure. I don't want, yeah. Like, I feel like Shaq out here,
Yeah.
And so I'm just going like, if you can, but in that sense though, that was the purpose. Is the first time you shot it, you're like, oh, I'm stupid, and then the more and more you did it, you almost just became numb to it. You were just like, oh, this is just what it is. It's practice, and I suck at free throws, so I have to go do free throws.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you do that, like, if it's evangelism, hey, I'm going to go try and talk to that person about Jesus. And it's like, well, what if they laugh at you? I don't know. I'll do it again. It's just like, there's that, yes, that's going to sting and it's going to hurt my pride, but there's almost that symbiotic relationship of the more you do it, you actually empty yourself of pride more and more and more. And it gets easier and easier and easier for you to do that because you just view it as
Yeah. So
practice.
you just, when you realize like what I have is what I have.
Yeah.
And I can't compare it with what somebody else has. It's what I have. And so I'm going to give it everything I have. And in doing that, it means I got to be in the zone.
Yeah.
Boom. So I got to be in the zone to say, this is what I have. And then you just keep moving, don't quit. Like, it's just, don't quit.
Yeah.
And I think the example, Joshua didn't quit. 40 years. Like, he just kept going. And 40 years later, God says, now it's your turn.
Well, the last thing I want to talk to you about today is, you said that God did not bring you out to leave you out. And again, I think that is part of that lie where it's like, God will lead me into the promised land, tell me to go up against my enemies, and then leave me to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's God's going to call me out to do this great thing for his kingdom, and he's going to let me fall flat on my face. And so tell me a little bit about that. How do we start to reject this lie that God called me out of my sin, but he's just going to kind of leave me out in the cold?
Yeah, so it really comes down to knowing who God is, going back to that part, his nature, his character, his heart. And if you view God accurately as a loving, caring father who wants to guide his children to a better place, then it's much easier to comprehend that when you bring somebody out of one situation that's bad, you do so because you have something better to offer them. Like, as a father, like, when you see your children in a dangerous situation, they might be having a blast, but you're like, it's dangerous. And so I'm taking you out of that, and I'm taking you into something that is going to be more beneficial for you, right? And so for me, it's just knowing and resting in the character of God, who he is at his core, and then just trusting that he has something better.
Yeah.
He's not going to give, the parables and the examples, and he's not going to give you a snake, if you ask for, something good.
Right.
If you say, hey, I'm hungry, or I need this, he's not going to then trick you and give you something bad. He's not going to say, oh, look, I'm bringing you out of this bad, and it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think we have a responsibility as Christ followers to do this because we're supposed to be imitators of Christ and imitators of God. And I think that most people that have this is not necessarily because God has done that, but Christians have done that to them. You know, okay, hey, you got to give up drugs and alcohol. And they're like, I gave up drugs and alcohol, but I had to leave, you know, the crack house that I was in. And so now I'm homeless. And we're like, well, good luck with that. You're not coming to my house because you're you're a drug addict. And it's just like, you know, we've called you out of that. And then we're like, yeah, we're not going to really, you know, hey, you should give up, you know, whatever you're into. And they're like, well, I had to leave this abusive relationship. And we're like, yeah, I'm not, you know, like, and sometimes we just leave them stranded. Then they have church hurt. And so it's like, it's not necessarily, sometimes I believe that people are afraid that God leaves them out in the cold, but it's that Christ followers leave them out in the cold. And I feel like we have a responsibility to maintain God's reputation in that area.
yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
Final thought before we zip on out of here.
Probably got a bazillion of them.
Yeah.
Bazillion.
Final thought is God has more in store for us. That what he's done brought us out. He's not done. Like we're in process. So my final thoughts are quit wandering and start worshiping. Get back to focusing on God, trusting him, and just see what he does with what you have. And don't stop. Don't quit. If you catch hell, don't hold it. And if you're going through hell,
Don't zonk it on the head.
don't stop.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Don't stop.
Don't stop. Stop.
So if you're going through hell right now, don't stop.
Who sang that again?
Ron Canoli.
Yeah. Okay.
Man,
I
good
was
old,
like, Ron.
good old Ron Canoli worship songs.
I should have guessed. See,
If you catch hell, don't hold it. And if you're going through hell, don't stop.
I was
Such a delicious
You're
name.
welcome.
I was too fearful to speak out. And
There you go.
Well, thanks for joining us here on the 167, guys. We'll see you guys later. Stay tuned for a 7-minute story. Hey, welcome back to 7-Minute Stories. I am here with Andy Souphilis.
Hi.
So, Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself for the listeners.
Well, I'm Andy. I'm almost 13. I'm in 7th grade, and surprisingly, the past 13 years of my life have been kind of crazy, and that's why I'm here. So, yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us about that?
So, I was born in West Dallas, Wisconsin, and I lived a normal life for, the first 8 years. I believed in God, but our family was never too dedicated in the church. We didn't go to church, but we believed that there was a God, but we never really like dove into the Bible or anything. And then, when I was 8, my mom found out she was pregnant with my baby sister. And that was exciting, very exciting. And I was super excited for that to happen. And then it did happen. Everything went really good. And it was really nice having her around. And it was really nice being like an older brother, because I really wanted to be, since I pretty much learned how to walk. I just wanted, because my sister used to teach me, she used to teach me stuff, like when I was younger. She used to teach me, like, before I even went to kindergarten, she was teaching me, like, the shapes and numbers and stuff. And I really wanted to do that to someone else. And I was really excited to do that. But about 11 months after she was born, it was the end of May of 2019, and she got a little sick. And we thought nothing of it. We thought, oh, it was a little bug. She'll be okay tomorrow. So we went to the doctor just to make sure, and it looked like she was fine. She just had the flu. And then tomorrow, she felt better. It looked like she was feeling better. She wasn't really vomiting as much as the day before, so everything was looking fine. And then we went, but at that night, we went back to Children's Mercy because she was starting to, like, get back. She started vomiting again. And Children's Mercy was like, hey, no, she's all right. She looks all fine. You can just go home, and everything should be good. And then that night, she got really sick, and she had around a 103.8 fever. And Children's Mercy was like, no, we can't do we can't do a emergency thing. We can't take her in unless it's 104 because that's in the emergency level. And we thought, all right, that's a little weird, but okay. And then we just went to bed. And then the next morning she was gone. We just found her in her crib. And she was just not there.
She died in her sleep.
Yeah, she passed away. And then that day was just kind of a blur. It was just very, very emotionally damaging. And it didn't really. And then while that happened, Pastor Rick came to our house. He was like, hey, you should come to the church. And the next day was a Sunday, so we did. We went to the church, and we started going every single week. And the next few months up to, like, 2020 was, like, just kind of a blur. I mean, I was, like, 8 or 9 at the time. It didn't really hit me that hard for some reason. I just really didn't think of it too hard. And then COVID hit, and that was an entire disaster in of itself. And then around October, around this time of 2020, I started getting, like, it started actually hitting me. I started feeling, like, a little more emotional about it. And then I developed kind of like a PTSD, basically. Like, I got really, every time my mom and dad left for somewhere, if I text them and they don't respond, I just have, like, almost an anxiety attack. And it was really bad to the point where I'd have to, like, text them every 20 minutes to make sure they were fine because I was too scared of something happening. But,
So you were scared of something happening to them while they were away.
yeah, I was like, my brain was going cuckoo at the time. Like, I would be trying to just focus on whatever I'm doing when I'm, like, home alone. And then my brain would be like, hey, they're probably going to get, like, in a car crash or something. And I'm like, why? No, you don't need to do that. And then I just get, like, really scared because I believed that might actually happen. And there was a high chance of that happening because that's what I had for, like, a few months. And that was around the time I moved. So that was, like, April of 2021. And after a few months, I got better. And it was just a really traumatic experience because it was because now the feeling of, like, her loss was hitting me hard and it was starting to get really emotional. And then I just got that really bad PTSD.
Was there something particular that helped you kind of work through that?
I just kind of took my mind. I tried not to think about it. I just tried to make myself think, no, that's not going to happen. Everything's going to be all right.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really anything in particular. I just kind of got over it. I'm like, no, I can't let these, like, thoughts control over me.
Yeah. I mean, that's an active thing that's cool that you're doing that because that's what adults have to do as well is that they have to say, no, this isn't true. Like, I'm going to refute that. I'm going to say that that's a lie. I'm going to focus on what's true. Like, that's actually a really good active thing.
Yeah.
It's healthy.
And then at the same time around October 2020, I also noticed, hey, the thing in the back looks pretty cool. That's the tech booth.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked Jake about it. He told me to ask Ryan. And then I asked Ryan about it. And he said, sure, we can probably get you into shadow. And then I started shadowing the people doing the tech booth. And soon enough, he told me that I had to be 12 to be in the tech booth. So instead I went to Kids World. And now I've been serving in the Kids World tech booth to this day. And I had to wait almost exactly a year. But now I'm finally doing I'm also doing the actual tech booth in the main service as well. So I've been really serving a lot here as well, every single week.
That's fantastic, man. I love it. I know that you're saying, like, oh, it's kind of a blur. Like, I remember your guys' first Sunday. I remember your first Sunday and talking to your parents and, talking to you and your sister.
Yeah.
So that's, that was a brave and, pretty traumatic thing to go through.
Yeah. It was pretty hard. I mean, I didn't really think about it that much until, like, October of 2020, and then it started hitting me like, I should have a sister. I should be raising my sister. I should be raising, like, a baby sister. And right now, she would be, I think almost 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So she would be going to kindergarten next year. And that was also kind of weird. Like, I should have a toddler running around my house and causing trouble and being a maniac.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, my personal belief on that, like I said, Chris and I lost 2 children, and we think that we're going to meet them someday in heaven. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
So I think she'll be waiting for you. And, I always wonder what it's going to be like, if you'll recognize her, like, right away, or if she'll be like, who are you? She's like, Andy, it's me. That'll be good.
Yeah.
What else? Is there anything else? Like, how is your, you said kind of at first your parents, like, you guys believed in God. Like, how has your relationship with God grown through this?
So when I was before this whole thing happened, it was I just kind of believed, but I didn't really look into it. But so when we started going to church, I started learning a lot more about the Bible, and I started really like focusing into it and trying to learn a lot more. And it's really grown over me. Like I've had a few times in my church career, and I'm like, wow, this doesn't make any sense at all. Like how if there's like two separate timelines here. There's one where we had the Big Bang and everything just came out of nowhere, and then there's the second one where there's Adam and Eve and they just started the entire universe. I'm like, And then I found this really cool. Me and my dad found this really cool thing called it was like a video show called like the Truth of God or something like that, and it was basically where he would it was like the proof of God's existence. He would find it was this podcast where he would he would list out like things that basically prove that God was real and God is real, and he was the one who created the universe.
That's awesome, man. I love stuff like that. I
Yeah.
watch Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham and all those guys. But that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love when people are investigating and really trying to find a foundation for their faith. So keep at it, okay?
Yeah.
All right, thanks for coming on and sharing your 7-minute story, man.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
We'll see you guys next time.
Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.